We've just been to Westminster University, finish up the paperwork for Thursday's seminar actually.
Okay.
And we're going to head to the city now, have a quick meeting, and then pop back to the hotel, get ready and go out for dinner.
So do we have time for a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Because I've just been thinking, yesterday we were talking about risk, how people calculate it wrong.
Yeah.
And it's just this running theme over the past week or so. We've been talking about people calculating things wrong, making the wrong decisions when it comes to their money and their lives. Why don't people know this stuff?
Well, really what it comes down to is the traditional education system. This stuff isn't taught in the traditional education system. And when you think about it, in the education system, this question of how to make a success of yourself, very clearly, this isn't in the curriculum of the traditional education system. And when you think about teachers and school or university, look at the infrastructure that they are part of. It's pretty obvious that teachers during your entire childhood are really the spokesperson of the infrastructure that they're already part of. So they're obviously going to be protective of it. And they're going to champion the traditional education system. But the problem is that these people that are part of it, they're always giving you the debilitating message, which is not, or the opposite of the principles or requirements to become successful. So you have to look at it objectively, and it's very obvious that teachers themselves in the traditional education system have a conflict of interest with potentially your own objectives if you want to actually get freedom and success. It's not part of the curriculum, and the teachers are not going to teach you it because it's not part of the curriculum, and they're protective of their own infrastructure. Now, the ultimate example of this, I guess, is your parents. So your parents have always been part of the infrastructure. They came through the traditional education system, and your parents are protective of you. And because they're protective of you, they're going to try and ensure that you do the right thing, or what they think is the right thing. So for example, taking a job, and it's safe. So what we were talking about earlier with risk, your parents also have a conflict of interest, and that conflict of interest is emotion. And with them being protective of you, that's driven by emotion. And additionally to this, so imagine you go to get a new job, or you go and get a business set up for yourself, a business infrastructure, or even a business deal. When you go to your parents and ask them for their advice on what you think is the right financial decision or right career choice, what's going to happen is your parents are going to probably default to the answer of, well, that looks risky, or I wouldn't do this if I were you. Your parents at the end of the day are protective, and they want to be proud of you. But they don't necessarily know what's actually good for you. Only you really know what's good for you. So for me, it's two things that it comes down to as to the reasons why people don't know this stuff. It's the traditional education system and your parents, and overall that's conflict of interest. And what you've actually got to do is seek out alternative education and seek out mentors, so successful people that do not have a conflict of interest. Now, if you can manage to do that, then you set yourself up in a situation where your education begins when you leave school or university. And that's what people have to remember. Really, your education doesn't start until you leave school or university, because that's the real world. And you have to seek out the alternative education, say no to your parents in terms of financial advice and career advice. If, for example, your parents are not wealthy, they're cash flow poor, they're asset poor, they don't know what they're talking about, they're wrong, they've made all the wrong decisions themselves. So you have to seek out the alternative education, you have to seek out the mentors that don't have the conflict of interest. So for example, if you go and work for a corporate and you're assigned a mentor, well, that person obviously still has a conflict of interest, because as you come up through the company, you might end up becoming one of the people that challenges their job.
Right.
So there's obviously still a conflict of interest. So you have to look at things objectively and make sure when you're seeking out the alternative education and the mentors that there's no conflict of interest. And that's why people don't know this stuff, because from childhood, all the infrastructure that's built around them creates an environment where debilitating messages are provided consistently via conflict of interest. That's why people don't know it. So people have to just seek out the alternative education and seek out the mentors.